Does he always mean what he writes? How far do you take that? I mean, where does interpretation come into this?
Oh, we could probably bring up a lot of discussions right now, I'm sure.
Discussions. Subito pianos, for instance?
Subito pianos, yes.
Yeah.
The tied eighth notes in the later quartets. He'll tie two eighth notes together, which means a quarter note. It could be bom, or it could be beam, bom, right, beam.
It's sort of an echo or a bounce or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and trying to resolve that. But I think we need to have the discussion and we need to have the argument. And luckily we all play a lot, so you could try it a few different ways on stage. But I think sometimes it's inconclusive, and you just have to come up with your own decision, your own intelligence, your own life experience. And someone might disagree with that.
There's always one member of the quartet who thinks it's not inconclusive.
Yeah.
And there's also...
And which instrument does that member normally play?
It changes every day.
Yes. There's also, he has metronome markings written in not all of the quartets. And, you know, you can sit and play with the metronome and say, gosh, this is beyond me, I can't play this tempo. But somebody else might say, what are you talking about? This is, of course, the tempo you play.
Yes.
And friends talking about his performances said that he changed tempos all the time when he played his piano sonata. So the metronome marks and tempos are an endless discussion. How much do you change the tempo between the first and second theme of Opus 95, for instance? You know, we could all talk till the cows come home about that. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's the process of discussion that Christine's alluding to that gives a performance its strength. It's not that you found the answer, but that right now you're going to go for this one, you know, and then maybe next week it's going to be a different one.
Mm. Sometimes you only discover it in a concert too, not in the rehearsal.
That's true.
So your interpretations are constantly evolving. Is that the way of putting it? Or do you find that you're striving for one interpretation and then when you've got it, that's it? This is our way of playing it.
Yeah. Always evolving. Always.
Oh, what do you mean? We had played exactly the same. We don't even rehearse anymore.
I have an expression, and I'll even say, I was just talking to Helene, I think about this, I'll say, oh, ancient history. I said, back, 20 years ago, ancient history, we used to do it this way. And of course, after 20 years, you have a different way of approaching a subito piano or a phrase or a tempo marking. And so just as, we're evolving, so is our Beethoven, interpretation, so.
He was a viola player, wasn't he, Beethoven? I mean, how well does he... Let me put it in...
Who isn't
in
a
the
viola player? Name a great composer that didn't play the viola.
He was a pianist who played viola, so he could...
Well, of course.
How technically good is his writing? I'm not talking about the musical sort of picture here. I'm just talking about the craft of writing. How much does he write for the instrument itself?
Well, I keep coming back to this uncompromising thing. Like, it's possible, but it's not easy. And it's not like, there's composers like, say, Wieniawski or somebody who you can tell he's writing from the violin, for the violin. It's the pleasure of playing. It's the sense of joy, of self-expression that's not, terribly fraught. But this is about the music. He knows the instruments. It's clear he knows the instruments, but he's not going to compromise what he wants to say just because it's hard. And so it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's passages in the late quartet which are harder than, I think, any concerto for the first violin. Just outrageous. Opus 135, the presto.
Yeah.
Even that trio you just heard in 1806.
That's right.
It's shocking.
Yerzy's back there still sweating.
Yeah, we're all getting very nervous.
Yeah.
But when the music is so great, and it's such a great work of art, you don't mind putting in those hours and the arguments and the discussions to make it happen. And I really like the uncompromising. It's Beethoven, and he's worth it.
With the last string quartet, the late string quartets, I'm going to ask again who he's writing for. And I know you're going to say he's writing for himself, but beyond that, who is he writing for? Is there an ideal audience there? Or
Everybody.
Very
Wasn't it he who said not for you but for a later age?
Yes.
That was
Yes.
Beethoven.
I
So,
think
he knew something.
one of the things I'm always amazed at is that, composers today and, between Beethoven and today, they can listen to other composers and they hear what the other composers around them are writing. He did not. So it was here and it was here. And he expressed things that I think that other composers at that time weren't expressing yet or since. And he didn't have the influence of his fellow composers his last years. He only had his own inner sanctum, inner mind of, hearing those things.
I think he also had a stronger and stronger philosophy of life as he got older. You hear this in his music. There's reams and reams of books you can read by theorists on Beethoven quartets. Our little Bible is Joseph Kerman. Because he's distinguished in the way he characterizes in the English language what Beethoven was on about. But I think what is interesting is you have many theorists who talk about Beethoven politically and about how these are political statements in the late quartets of the aristocracy and the common people coming together and intertwined in this kind of weird dance where the end result is a brotherhood of man. I think he never, even though he might have become cynical in his late life, he still believed it was possible that there could be a brotherhood of all men, and there wouldn't be any more kings and princesses, and there wouldn't be any more sort of disassociated, population that wasn't integrated into society. And all his late works have an incredible degree of contrast, but in the end, the more you play them, you see that every note of each work belongs just in that work, in an integrated way.
you've mentioned this before, Rolf, but do the other string quartets find that knowing a little bit more about Beethoven's life throws light on the music?
I would say absolutely. We are just to pick up on this idea about the early quartets were written for high Viennese classic style. You're talking about amateur violinists. There was a sense of that tradition, making it accessible. Then French Revolution, the ideas there, the motivation to write music that was actually influenced by revolutionary music and themes and ideas of the day, carried him for a long time. And then the disillusionment when the French Revolution was over.
Yes.
The audiences started to drop off, and Beethoven was no longer the kind of hero he was. He started writing for a small circle of close friends, which were the people who heard the late Beethoven quartets, mostly. And what I find fascinating is the kind of disillusionment after the French Revolution is a little bit, this is a real stretch, but a bit of the same sentiments that America is experiencing after the crisis in the Middle East. That there's a feeling of, what did we do, what did we accomplish, and feeling just lost. And I think that, for me, is some of the context when the late Beethoven quartets were written. And like you said, still believing in this brotherhood, I find is really key.
Mm-hmm. Do you approach the late quartets in performance in a different way? I mean, you certainly wouldn't go out there and have a double espresso before you started playing the late quartets. I mean, is there a particular frame of mind that you have to get into?
I mean, we just played 132 2 days ago in Connecticut somewhere, and I mean, whenever you begin that piece, you just know that you're setting out on this incredible journey, and chances are 10 people are going to come up to you afterwards and say how deeply moved they were. I mean, and you can't help but bring your best self to it. So, I mean, not that you don't have that mindset with every quartet, but there's a certain depth, and you know that you have to go there as well, and it's painful. I mean, we just played, after the slow movement of 132, I looked at a woman in the audience, and I don't know, we were in a really magical place out in Music Mountain, Connecticut, and I caught eyes with this woman, and she just looked at me, and she did this, and I just looked at her, and it was really a great moment, one of the greatest moments for me that I've had.
Yeah.
Sorry? Yes, hand on the heart. Sorry, Ida, hand on the heart.
Yeah.
Anyway, you absolutely, before you set out, it's like climbing, Mount Everest. It really is.
I feel like the music takes us. Some music you set out on, but it takes you. I feel when I start that first note of 131, which is the one we're playing,
Yes.
it's just like, someone's taking me by the hand, and now I just surrender. I mean, of course you've worked your ass off, but somehow it's like, it's taking you, and you just need to be open.
Yes. Okay, anything to add to that? No?
We concur.
If you had the chance, you've studied these quartets in great detail. You've given many performances. If you had a chance of asking Beethoven something, what would you ask him? Now's your chance. I think they've been working so hard at these quartets. They've got the answers.
Can you write us another one?
I think it's obvious. The obvious question is who the immortal beloved was. Always
Yes.
wanting to know the identity of that person, or was it a concept? And about the lead in his walls, or wherever the lead poisoning came from.
Yes, he even knew.
Let me open it up to our friends here in the audience. And do you have particular questions? Anybody? The gentleman there.
Does Beethoven ever quote from either his own music or anyone else in the 16 quartets?
Well, there's the Russian themes and the Razumovskys. They're direct quotations, are they not?
Yes.
Although they're completely changed and
Distorted.
completely distorted. Like most of them are slow, very kind of sacred or patriotic Russian tunes, and he takes the mickey out of them by speeding them up, changing them from the minor to the major key, and just being Beethoven, just sticking his nose almost out at anybody who almost takes themselves too seriously.
There's, apparently, around the time of the Opus 131, he was studying Jewish music. He wanted to write an oratorio on Jewish themes, and there's a theory that the first theme, and then particularly in the sixth movement, the little movement before the last movement, that tune. Yada, yada, is like the Kol Nidri.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
so the inspiration is taken from that.
Mm-hmm. Other question? Gentleman in the back.
What's your comfort level with string orchestra, Opus 131?
Next question.
I have to say, though, there are times, especially in the late Beethovens, or sometimes even the middles, where I wish I had a section, and it wasn't just me playing that one part. I'll say, where are my troops? Too bad I don't have three or four second violinists behind me, but it's a more intimate genre with one on a part, I guess.
I think the emotions that result with one person trying to sound like an orchestra is what Beethoven had intended. And that is the feeling of that struggle and almost unattainable power.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, right here.
You talked about how much Beethoven self-edited and rewrote. Were there any pieces where you, from his writings, you can say he achieved what he wanted and he was happy with whether a string quartet or a symphony or whatever?
I don't think there's any way of knowing, at least I don't know, unless he's written something. It's probably like how we feel. When we play something, it's always could be better. I never walk off stage and go like, okay, that's it. I'll never have to play that piece again. That was it! Never, never.
I think in every piece, Beethoven tried something different, a different compositional process. He was very daring in that way. He just didn't go back to the same issues. And if you follow the keys, the first quartet in E flat and then the harp quartet, and then you go to 127, you see he instead of revising Opus 74 in E flat, he just went to another quartet and did something a little more sophisticated in E flat that he probably wanted to do but didn't have the experience in the other E flat. Often you can follow each key that quartets are in and see the development, even through the piano repertoire and the orchestral repertoire. A lot of composers are responding emotionally to the keys they're writing in, and that brings them to a certain compositional process.
What didn't Beethoven say about the cavatina, that whenever he thought of that piece, because he never heard it, when he thought of it, would bring him to tears, and that it was the deep. I forgot exactly what he said about it, but that it moved him more profoundly than anything he had written. So I would think that there's some level of satisfaction.
Yep, that's true.
There.
That's
Indeed.
true. Yeah.
And the very fact that he published his quartets too shows that he had a certain comfort level, I suppose. You know. And 2 more questions we'll take. Right here in the front.
I just want to ask you something about you guys. You talked about the interpretation that each one of you will interpret the music as 4 people can maybe interpret it 4 different ways, the same thing that you're playing. Can you tell us a little bit how you are working together, that you are so together and so perfect together?
I just do what they tell me to do.
In rehearsal.
In performance, it's just living on the edge. She tries something new all the time.
No, I told Sharon that I was going to say that, and then you gave me the great opportunity. She's like, no, you're not.
It's something that I'll speak for our quartet. We've been together for 25 years. We celebrated in July. And I have known Joanna.
You had a party and
Yes.
you didn't invite me?
Joanna and I have known each other for 27 or 28 years. And it is such a fine line between respect, admiration, conviction, self-esteem. I would have to say, I'll speak for our quartet, you're constantly figuring it out and tangoing in a way that you let everyone have their own voice, but you make sure that there's a concerted, interpretation for the next concert. And sometimes things aren't going your way or, whatever. But it's a constant, it's a striving to be synchronized in technique and in emotion and in interpretation. And there's a lot of sometimes very heated, intense discussions. I think every one of us will say that, and it's something that we're constantly struggling with. And it's not just being able to play those pieces for our audience, but the interaction and the relationship we have between the 4 of us that's healthy and happy and makes us be the best person, best violinist, violist, cellist that we can be.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well put. And one last question. The lady over there.
You told us a lot about playing the music. Something that intrigues me is how music comes to be written. I don't know, I imagine all of you have written something, but I don't know. How does a composer decide which instruments, at what point to do this, at what point to do that? This is something I find hard to understand. It's not as if they're using a language that they're using every day, like as we do. I mean, a writer obviously has the advantage of using something that is used every day anyway. But a musician, a composer, I find that very hard to understand. I don't know if it's possible to explain it.
Well, it's easy to understand in terms of storytelling, I think. If you're a writer, characters come into your head, and those characters transform. And as a writer, you get into a stream, and then I think the most important thing is you have a sense of form.
And you know intuitively whether it's going to be a short story or a novel.
Yes.
Or a mystery, it sort of determines itself.
And I think in terms of what instrument you're writing for, we definitely all play quartets because we think I don't know if I speak for all my friends, but I think so, that we think that composers wrote their best music for string quartet, and that that's a form you write for when you want to say something particularly intimate, profound, and meaningful, and personal, because of the four voices that are so similar, but are four different people. And so we feel very privileged that composers have written such great music for us.
But I think also within quartet writing, there's a sense of foundation. Rolf was talking about form. You need to have foundation, so obviously the cello and the viola are going to sort of provide that. Cello for sure, the foundation. The viola, the sort of juicy middle part, the soul. And then there's those higher...
Free viola lessons.
But then obviously then the higher voices, also just orally, we pick up high voices. We pick up the higher line just naturally. But I think that's a really interesting question that you asked. It's hard to answer, really, especially because in the context of Beethoven, I mean, at times at the end of 132, all of a sudden the cello has the melody way up high, and the second violin and the viola are pounding out the bass. But I think there is that sort of basis of foundation, middle, top, and that would inform how someone would write. But when it comes to Beethoven, he was a revolutionary.
Maybe for one of the future conversations in this series, we'll get 2 or 3 composers together, and you can put that sort of question to them precisely. Yes, yeah. Anyway, I really want to thank our 3 string quartets: the Lafayette from Victoria, the New Zealand Quartet from New Zealand. And Wellington, and the Penderecki Quartet from Waterloo, Ontario. So thank you very much, guys.